featuring stories, thoughts, experiences, and opinions provided by all of you about increasing the minimum wage. The Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2013 is a bill sponsored by Senator Tom Harkin and Representative George Miller to raise the federal minimum wage for all workers from $7.25 to $10.10 an hour by 2015, and then a continued adjustment of wages to meet the rise of living costs. Step 1. How does this affect me?
I currently work at Buffalo Wild Wings Hilltop, and I'm only making about $7.25. I honestly am always so stressed because my responsibilities contain host, cedo, runner, cashier, cleaning bathrooms, and even working in the kitchen portioning food. I am trained to do so much, and the place is always busy. Along with working such long hours is just so hard. Every time I get a person at the register, their total is usually more than $20, meaning the company itself could afford at least $7.75. The place itself is always on a wait list for seating, along with the place being huge.
I used to work for a car wash earning $8.50 an hour, and even then I was coming up short and had to get a second job at the Dollar Tree earning the same wage. With 2 paychecks, I was doing all right, but I was working very little hours and saw no point in breaking my back for 2 jobs that didn't appreciate my effort.
I worked in a local grocery store for 5 years. I did not receive a raise until my 3rd year when we got new owners. I went from $7.25 to $7.75 because he thought it was ridiculous that I hadn't received a raise with working there so long. I ended my employment with $7.95 after 5 years.
Whenever I think about minimum wage, I always kind of go back to my years as a senior in high school when I was working at a grocery store, just bagging groceries, and eventually moved up to cashiering. And I think about what would happen if I were still there, what my life would be like if I had stuck with that particular path. The thing is, I like it. I think that minimum wage jobs are not necessarily bad jobs to hold. There's a certain level of interaction with customers that you don't always get in other positions. So I think to some degree, they can be incredibly beneficial, especially for those just coming out of high school. But when I look back and remember that after working there for a year, I was still only making $7.25 an hour, I can't help but think, my gosh, I'm 24 years old. Could I possibly be living on my own if I had stuck it out with minimum wage? When I think about that $7.25 an hour, that minimum wage job, I remember the good times I had with my coworkers and how much I loved interacting with all the individuals who came and went throughout the day. But I also remember how hard it was to gather money for things that I needed. So when it comes to the minimum wage, I think it's time for us to reconsider the level that we're at. And I think it's time for us to genuinely look at what it takes for people to live nowadays.
As a college student paying her own way through college because financial aid is solely based off of parent income, balancing 3 jobs and school still isn't enough.
I work at Walgreens, and they're pretty good about giving employees raises. They do a one-on-one interview with you on your work performance, and your raise depends on how well you work, which to me is fair. The only thing that I do not like is that eventually the pay will cap out. The most a cashier can be paid at Walgreens is about $11.50 an hour. Eventually, because of inflation, $11.50 will not be enough to support the cost of living in the U.S.
Throughout high school, I worked at a sports store with a minimum wage of $6.25 plus commission. I was a part-time worker, working 15 to 20 hours a week. I know that with my paychecks, I wouldn't be able to support myself without the help of my parents. I don't know how other individuals are able to make a living and support themselves with a set minimum wage amount.
Slipped inside somebody's office, and it was one of those, like, you know, there's on the other side of the door, all those, like, the work bulletins, like, this is here, this is your worker rights, this is all this stuff, and it, like, had the federal minimum wage, you know, posted on there, and it was like $7.25, $7.15, I was like, can people still make $7.25? Like, because I felt like, you know, like, that's what I was making, I think, when I was on minimum wage. I was like, that's crazy, you know? I mean, and I think, you know, kind of thinking back, I probably wasn't on 725, but at this point, it's like, it seems like ridiculously low for the money. When I was on minimum wage, and it was probably closer to $5, that's my guess, is something like, you know, we're talking like mid-90s. It had just gone up from like $4.25. I think one of my first jobs was $4.25, which you've got nothing to compare it to. It's like, well, I don't know, what is this? You know, but you know, when you're in high school and you know your money is primarily for, you know, going to movies and stuff and putting gas in the car, it's not as big a deal. But I think, you know, when you look at people trying to live on a minimum wage, you know, when you're like, you know, when you do your taxes at the end of the year and you're still below the poverty line, very clearly, like, your wage is keeping you impoverished.
I worked at Domino's Pizza and it was the worst experience of my life. They pay minimum wage and I barely got hours throughout the week. Not getting paid well and not being scheduled made my attitude toward working there pretty poor.
The first job I had was a minimum wage job. I worked at the Oakdale Outlet Mall in a shoe store, and I would have been 15 years old. And I thought it was pretty cool because I had a job, so I probably didn't know that I should have been paid more at the time because I was just pretty excited I didn't have to babysit because I was bad at it. After that, I also worked in the same mall at a linen store, same deal. I think I vaguely remember getting a 5-cent raise, which in retrospect didn't make that much of a difference, but you feel like you're making more money. After that, I worked in restaurants. I waited tables, and I distinctly remember that there was a period of time, I think it was right before I went on to my master's degree, that I worked in Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, they actually could pay you less than minimum wage because of tips. And so that was the first time I'd ever encountered that. I do not know if Wisconsin is still in that situation, but I remember that it didn't ever really balance out, and so I didn't ever seek to work on the other side of the river after that because I didn't like that.
I work in a restaurant here in town as a waitress. Being a waitress, as I'm sure you all know, I only get paid minimum wage and completely rely on people coming into the restaurant and leaving me a tip. I typically work 4 days a week and maybe 25 hours. So $7.25 times 25 hours should give me about $180 paycheck. But because I receive tips, my checks are taxed so much that I don't even receive half of the check each week. My whole rent depends on people's generosity, and that doesn't always happen.
And I grew up in Manhattan, Kansas. It's a town of about 50,000 people in northeast Kansas. And when I say I grew up there, I mean born there, raised there, school there, university there, and I was an undergraduate for 6 years, so I got bonus time there too. And when I was going through college, I mean, even before I was going through college, when I was in high school, my mom had always managed restaurants, and every kid kind of wants to be like their parents. So when I was old enough to get my first job when I was 14, I got a job as a busser in one of the restaurants that she worked in. And I quickly moved my way up from busser to dishwasher to host, and before I knew it, I was waiting tables. What I didn't expect was that I was going to end up waiting tables for literally a decade, from 14 to 24. And from 18 to 24, all of the waiting tables that I did went toward paying for college. Kansas is a little bit different than Minnesota. Obviously, the minimum wage is $7.25 federally, so that's consistent across the country. But in Kansas, the law allows businesses to pay people who wait tables a lower minimum wage. And in Kansas, that wage is $2.13 an hour. So where I waited tables for 10 years, I was only paid $2.13 an hour, and supposedly the tips that I made would compensate for the difference. That wasn't always the case. Some days I would only make $30, and then there would be some days where there were big football games and I'd make $200, but it was impossible to live on that kind of a wage. There's no way that you can budget when you have no idea what your income is going to be from day to day, and it made things really difficult.
Step 2, opposition.
I don't think the minimum wage should be raised. because it's a vicious cycle on what the minimum will be. Also, big chains will not lose a percentage in the profit. Won't the people making 10 want more? And they should if they have been there longer and have more productive experience.
As a person in college, I don't feel that I would need a higher wage. Giving more money to the youth is not a good idea. Find a better way to give money to the people who need to support their families. Giving a person more money for doing the same work is not going to help a company because they don't work harder for that pay. I'm all for taking money from big companies, but they will find cheap work whether it's in the US or not, so it will not help our lower working class. It would also not help smaller family-owned companies because they would go out of business because they will not be able to pay all the employees more with making the same.
There are other jobs in the world other than fast food. Think of the local mom and pop store. Instead of hiring 4 people at $7.25 now, they can only hire 3 people at $10. If your job isn't good enough for you, then find another one. Make your life better instead of changing laws. You are in control of your own happiness. If $8 an hour isn't good enough, go find something better. Look out for yourself instead of others looking out for you.
Your education is what sets you apart. Working for a food company only requires common sense. If you want a larger paycheck, your education level has to be higher.
I work at McDonald's and I've worked at 2 different stores, and most employees and even my managers don't respect their jobs. Most kids are lazy about their work, and even managers would rather sit in the back on their phone. And I've heard multiple stories from other friends with the same experience. Also, many employees steal food when no one is looking. They take a couple of nuggets or fries or sandwiches. They'll buy a dollar menu item, then go make it themselves and end up with a $5 sandwich. Their workers don't respect their jobs in the first place, and even though I would like more money, I just don't see it reasonable.
Step 3, frequently asked questions.
I don't know if I agree with raising the minimum wage, at least to over $10. I definitely think $7.25 is wrong, but some people work really hard in non-fast food jobs for $10 an hour. Why should people who are less educated and do less work be paid the same? The living standard has risen, I understand, but in order for people to be paid well, I think that a person needs to work hard. I'm not saying fast food chains are not, I'm sure it is, but it's not the same as working for something you were educated for. I also understand that welfare affects our government, but I still think that $10 is too high.
I believe everyone deserves a fair wage, but these large companies will not be willing to lose their huge profit margins just out of morals. They will increase the prices in order to keep those profits. Unless somehow we institute other laws that force them to be fair, they won't care what the public thinks of them.
I have a hard time believing it'll pass. Big businesses and corporations fund a lot of our senators and our representatives, so it will be hard to convince them. Yes, prices will rise if the wage is raised, because corporations want to make maximum profit and will use the bill as an excuse to raise prices.
A minimum wage increase will result in a price increase of 0.18% spread out over 2.5 years, meaning that consumers would pay at most 10 cents more for any product. For Walmart, a study was conducted to show how profit margins would change and how this would affect prices if there was an increase in minimum wage. In the end, after calculating all the various factors, it was shown that a basic product that is used in everyday life would increase by a penny.
I have heard lots of small business owners' voices that they would not be able to support a minimum wage hike, that people would have to be laid off because it would be too much to fund. I would be interested to hear more facts about how business owners could support a hike, as many people are still hurting for economic relief.
In Minneapolis, Minnesota, Punch Pizza raised their wages to $10 an hour. This proactive approach to help their workers in the long run resulted in a business boom. When customers found out how much they were paying their employees, they were more likely to buy their food in support of the small restaurant's choices of raising their wages. Those in need of a job applied to Punch Pizza, and they were able to hire more employees because of their increase in business due to their increase in wages.
A jump of $3 seems too much too fast. I think anything more than $9 would be too high at first, making it difficult for businesses to make a profit for some time.
Currently, the minimum wage is $2 less than it should be, considering inflation, to meet standard living costs. Here in Blue Earth County, a single adult must make $8.73 an hour in order to meet standard living costs. For one adult and one child, it is $18.96 an hour. And it gets increasingly higher with every person added to the equation. This wage increase is gradual, meaning that by the end of 2015, wages would reach the determined $10.10 an hour. Step 4, my story. I work at a fast food restaurant called Arby's in my hometown, and I have been with the company for 3 years today. I started there in high school and transferred to one of the stores here in Mankato. Unfortunately, I could not balance schoolwork, a job, and extracurricular activities. So by winter break, I was only working seasonally at my hometown store. Every summer and winter break, I go back to work as much as I can, at least 40 hours a week if possible. At this point in time, I am training to become a shift manager for the company that I hopefully will complete not long after this semester is over and we depart for summer break. When I first started working there, I was making $7.25 an hour, the minimum wage in Minnesota. Over the course of 3 years with the company, I have only received a 10-cent raise to make a total of $7.35 an hour. In the process of becoming a manager, I am doing twice the amount of work as all the other employees. And when I fully reach the status of manager, I will only be making $8 an hour. That 75-cent difference does not even put me above the federal poverty line for a single adult. This last summer, I was working 2 jobs in hopes that I could make more money in order to be financially stable throughout the school year. I applied for a number of jobs, and during each interview, they stressed the fact that they only pay minimum wage. Every single job I could apply for paid minimum wage. So in the end, I was working 2 minimum wage jobs. Even working these 2 jobs, I did not nearly make enough money to pay for my housing, tuition, and everyday expenses that accumulate when I'm not working during the school year. Some people say that a higher education is going to get you a higher paying job. But how do you pay for that higher education? In order to go to school, I have to take the jobs that don't pay above minimum wage so I can get a higher paying job. I don't receive financial support from my family while I'm at school, so I'm entirely on my own. Each year I pay at least $10,000 to receive the degree that will get me that higher paying job. But until then, I'm trying to survive on our below the federal poverty line minimum wage. Though my job at Arby's may only pay minimum wage, I have one of the most amazing general managers who actually cares for the employees and makes sure that they are well taken care of. I actually like my job. How many people can say that they like their job? Yeah, I get treated well at the store, so you can't tell me to go find a job elsewhere and to make my own happiness. Yeah, my other job at a clothing store in a mall that only pays minimum wage, I was treated so rudely as an employee that I never went back to work there during my breaks. I respect my fellow employees, and they show me the same respect. And at most jobs, you can't get that kind of treatment. I'm happy where I work, so I don't need to go elsewhere. This has nothing to do with the job itself or the working conditions. It has to do with the pay that they must abide by. As long as the minimum wage is at $7.25, that is what they will pay you, even if you can't live off that. My job is also not easy. For those of you who have worked in fast food, you know this to be true. You have to know how to do so many different things, like man each workstation, know how to properly clean every part of the store, take people's orders correctly, be able to deal with all types of customers, while still providing the best service possible. In one workday, a list a mile long needs to be accomplished. And as a manager, the labor is even more intensive and takes a lot more than people give us credit for. I would love to see you do my job for a day and still tell me it's easy and doesn't deserve a pay higher than minimum wage. It's true, I work with a lot of high school students that are lazy and do not work hard as myself or other employees on most occasions, but those people don't last. Half of our minimum wage workforce is between the ages of 20 and up. I also work with a lot of older adults that are trying to support their families. Most of them work at least 2, if not 3 minimum wage jobs to be able to survive and care for their children. 52% of families of full-time fast food workers are enrolled in at least one welfare program to make up for their low income. I think it's wrong that we cannot survive on the current minimum wage. This issue affects more than 10 million people in this country who are considered working poor. This is an issue that affects many of you here in this room and many people at this university.
I wholeheartedly support the Fair Minimum Wage Act.
I support increasing the minimum wage.
And I firmly support the Fair Minimum Wage Act.
I 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 support the Fair Minimum Wage Act.